improve. I want to begin very quickly by reminding us that we're here as a third sector talking about commissioning from the third sector. I know that often people lament the fact that the third sector is called the third sector because they think it gives the impression of being third class or third degree and so on. And I can well understand that. But let's just remind ourselves that what we're here to talk about this morning is something of not peripheral significance, but of major significance to Powys. The most recent data that we have tells us that there are now over 4,000 third sector organisations at work operating in our county, of which over 2,300 are actually based in Powys. Active in Powys. The rest are actually based in Powys. And there, I'm not going to go through all of those, but is a quick breakdown of the number of national, regional, local organisations and the numbers that, of organisations that say that they have branches in Powys, and indeed those that say, well, what we have is a project in Powys. But essentially, what we're talking about is something of very, very great significance. And of course, it's not just about those numbers, is it? Because those organisations deploy over 52,000 volunteers. Over 52,000 volunteers. And when it comes to commissioning, we'll talk about this just in a few moments, that economic contribution and that added value that our volunteers bring needs to be built in to the commissioning procurement cycle, because otherwise we end up shooting ourselves in the foot, and certainly unintended consequences arise. That sector there produces an annual income of £57 million for Powys, well, in recent years. And the vast majority of that does not come from the public purse. Again, when we talk about added value, that's something that we need to consider very, very importantly. And lastly, I could go on this slide, but I won't. Lastly, those organisations provide 3,500 paid jobs for the people of Powys. As a sector, the second highest employer, second only to the local authority. So we might be third sector, we are certainly not third class or of third importance. But it gets even better. And when you look at that, I hope those at the back can read that. That gives you an idea of the kind of activity that those organisations are involved in. And so you have there, if you can't read it, anything from advice and advocacy services to community justice services, environmental, health and social care, sport and recreation, and so on and so forth. Again, what I'm trying to illustrate there is that I think it was just, it wasn't last year, it was the year before, that our First Minister, Carwyn Jones, stood where I'm standing at our annual general meeting, and one of the things I remember him saying quite distinctly is that government, the public sector, can't deliver the programme alone. Now, if that's true of central government, then it's also true of local government and local statutory agencies. They need the third sector, as indeed we need them. It's a mutuality and a reciprocity of need, if you like, collaboration, cooperation, and partnership. The third sector, as we see there, is already a major provider of statutory services, of discretionary services, and, of course, a major provider of services that don't receive any funding from the public purse at all, but nonetheless provide the very fabric of what it means to be human, to be society, and to be community. And what I want us to take away from this partly is that the third sector cannot be compartmentalised. It may be that we have a cabinet member, for example, in Powys County Council, who has the third sector as part of his portfolio. But actually, the third sector is involved in construction, it's involved in waste management, as well as involved in health and social care and mental health and children and young people's services. The third sector is so multifaceted that there is no, and I will be bold enough to say this, there is no aspect of public service with which and in which we are not involved. And so our significance needs to be affirmed, I think. And more than that, the third sector is often, how much is up for discussion, I suppose, best placed to deliver. Some people, some organisations are already deliverers, but I know that there are many organisations in Powys that have an interest in delivering services, and certainly within commissioning and procurement and so on, have a keen appetite to learn more so that they can be ready to deliver procured and funded services. And the last thing I want to say about this slide is that the third sector, all those things, are actually brilliant value for money. We have calculated that the return for the public sector pound on many of those services is far more than the pound that is spent. One significant example is community transport, where the calculation is at least an 11-to-1 return. And so in terms of value for money, then the third sector has something very significant to bring to the party. But what about specifically the commissioning and tendering priorities from a third sector perspective? I think the first thing I'd like to say is that it's sometimes perceived that the third sector wants to make a special case for itself. I don't think that's the case. I've heard no organisation say to us anyway that we need to be immune from financial difficult decisions, or that we need to be a special case. And so nobody's arguing that the third sector should be in any way protected from difficulties or from challenges. But I think as well, I think we're a little confused at the moment as to whether we are a supplier or a partner. When you read the new commissioning and procurement strategy of Powys County Council, for example, the third sector is mentioned in several ways or at different junctures. But in every case, without exception, it's as, and I use the jargon of the document, as a robust supply chain. And so I go away with the question, do commissioners in Powys want the third sector to work with them, or do they want the third sector to work for them? Now, I've no hesitation that the question to that possibly is both. Perhaps it should be both. But what we haven't really yet teased out properly is where it is one and where it is the other. Because we need those discussions in order to actually address the things that Sue was talking about earlier as to when do we take part in decisions, in discussions, and when do we actually have to manage conflicts of interest that then it's right and proper that we're not part of those as providers. We are a partner, we are a supplier, but we haven't yet, and we need to, bottom out those issues. There are also issues around transparency. Again, I was very interested to hear Sue just a few moments ago talk quite rightly about the need in her route map to decide whether commissioners make or buy. Do they provide in-house or do they externally source that service? And that's right and that's proper. But as long as that's an open and a transparent process, so that people, yourselves and citizens and carers and service users can say, well, actually, yes, we can see clearly that the decision here to make or the decision here to buy has been properly made and the decision actually makes sense. But I think very importantly, for the third sector, we need to be assured that our commissioning and procurement policies, procedures and processes provide a fair playing field. A fair playing field between sectors, but also a fair playing field within the sector. And I haven't yet seen, particularly within our own statutory partners, a real commitment to the kind of principles that we believe are needed in order to create that fair playing field. Principles such as social return on investment, such as full cost recovery, such as contestability. I take part in discussions sometimes, and commissioners and procurement managers say to me, well, that's all very well, Carl, but when you're dealing with large contracts particularly, well, those things, we just can't consider those things. Well, that just seems to me to be at odds with what Sue has shared with us, and also it seems to me to be, if a principle is right, then it's right across the piece. It can't be compartmentalized as to right here or not right there. And more, we surely need a mainstreaming of social and environment values across the commissioning arena within Powys. I was at a social enterprise conference just a few days ago in Powys, and perhaps I don't understand, perhaps I'm sure there are things I don't know, but when you learn of a very, very major food waste contract going to Oxfordshire, and when you then learn that our local social enterprise providers need to enter into agreement with the new provider from Oxfordshire to broker whatever social impact their own social enterprise might have in partnership with them, you think, we've not got it right yet. There's something that's not quite built in a right way. And so again, that social, that environmental value, that added value that we bring needs to be there openly, transparently, effectively within the processes. But within the sector as well, what we need, I believe, in Powys is a healthy and diverse sector, where very large organisations can coexist with our small and medium-sized county-based organisations in partnership, in cooperation and in collaboration. And I believe that's important for the health of the sector and, as a consequence, for the health of Powys. Now, how you commission and procure services will either help that or it will undermine that. And so it needs to be built in to those processes and to the contracts in order that we don't end up somewhere that we don't really want to be. And perhaps Pavo has a role to play there. At least it's a role that we offer. Certainly we can't oblige it. But I think somewhere in that is going to be the need for small, medium and large organisations to come together as consortia or in some kind of partnership way. Now, that will happen without PAVO, irrespective of PAVO, but where PAVO can actually help that to happen and perhaps be the glue in all of that, then I'm quite keen that we play our part where that is welcome and where that's appropriate. And finally, the final slide is about things perhaps that need to be there as building blocks in order for all that I've been speaking about to come about. Firstly, there needs to be effective dialogue. Too often I hear providers tell us, well, you know, if only commissioners would talk to us. We feel as though we're in the dark. We feel as though we're not sufficiently informed about all manner of things. And then, of course, when I talk to commissioners, they say, we can't talk to providers because, you know, they have a vested interest and so on. And I know that we can have a long conversation about that, but that's where we are. That's the actual reality of certainly what we observe and what we experience on the ground. And somehow we need to actually realize the principles that Sue was talking about earlier about that effective communication, that effective dialogue. Timely and useful information. I think I will be candid enough to say that we did invite, and I'm not going to mention any names, we did invite a person from a commissioning body in Powys to come and participate in our conference today. And he and I had a conversation. I've already given too much away. And this person and I had a conversation. And what I was told, and it wasn't an ill-tempered conversation at all, but she said, the problem is, if I come there, they'll want to know who and what and when and why. And he said, I just can't go there. Of course, my response was actually, that's exactly what people need to know in order to be ready for the commissioning and the procurement that providers want to respond to. And if you think of things like, I know that providers are wondering, well, you know, we've been talking for years about whether or not the health board is going to engage in local commissioning at shire level. Now, I have conversations with senior managers that tell me probably, and probably quite quickly. And then other conversations, I think, well, perhaps it's not going to be as quick as that. We're confused. Equally, I know that on the cards for a long time has been an integration between social services in Powys and in Ceredigion. A feasibility study is underway, but I haven't heard anything about that feasibility study for a long, long time. And so are services going to be commissioned regionally, or aren't they? And if they are, what implications will there be for Powys providers if they need to provide across a wider region? And so that information is crucial, it's part of the dialogue, and we need that to happen in a very healthy way. Also, management and monitoring of contracts. Again, what providers tell us is that they're still working often on old SLAs, on contracts that have really, their shelf life went out a long, long time ago, and that monitoring relationship is something that causes a little concern. And then, effective cooperation and communication between joint commissioners, so that we avoid situations whereby, for example, the health board take a decision about commissioning something, let's say mental health services and so on, that impacts upon a service provider who is also commissioned by the council, but actually the council hasn't been part of that deliberation or that consideration, and so again we end up with unintended consequences for providers in our sake, third sector providers. And so I think what I've tried to do today is to say what we're here to talk about is of utmost significance. The potential is great. The potential is really, really exciting. But from our perspective, we have a real appetite to work constructively and positively with commissioners in order that we can get it right, so that the people that benefit are the people and communities of Powys that we're all here to serve. Thank you.